Thank you so much for attending. My name is Adrienne Esposito. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. We're joined today by some very talented, wise people on the critical topic of extended producer responsibility, which simply put means reducing our waste stream. As you all know, New York State has a challenge before us. Solid waste is an issue that we need to address. We need to manage our solid waste better, more effectively, and more wisely for the long term. And luckily, we have a plan to do that. And many of you probably have joined today, have heard about extended producer responsibility, or EPR, as we affectionately call it. We know it has the worst name in the history of bill names, but nonetheless, that is the name of the program. It's used throughout the globe, not just here. It's not just a program we're working to get here in New York, but rather it is one proven. Today's Zoom is to present information to get this, what can be a complicated issue, down to the bare facts in an understandable, presentable way. And we want very much for New York State to pass a law this legislative session, which is rapidly closing in about probably, I think it's 5 weeks, Senator. But we want to get a bill over the table this year. Many of us have been working on this for several years, and we're fortunate enough to have two wonderful presenters with us who have worked on this issue throughout America and also throughout the nation, throughout the globe. So without further ado, let me first introduce Senator Pete Harckham, who is chair of the New York State Senate Environment Committee in the Senate, and is sponsoring a bill right now on this important topic, and has been a champion of waste reduction in New York State in his tenure. So thank you very much for joining us, Senator.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, and many thanks to Citizens Campaign for the Environment and for Dawn and Scott for being here as well. I'm going to take a minute and just unhighlight myself. It's always a little odd to see myself in the screen, but thank you all for being here. This is a very important topic. New York is drowning in garbage. New York produces over 15 million tons of garbage a year. We're running out of landfills. Our landfills are rapidly closing. There are 10 waste incinerator sites in New York State. It may sound like an elegant solution to some, unless you live in one of those communities and have to deal with the emissions and hundreds of trucks going through your neighborhood streets on a daily basis delivering waste. Part of the problem is low recycling rates. Folks are really dutiful about putting and sorting into bins, but the problem is that many products can't be recycled, even though we think they can. Plastic, you look at any plastic packaging, it has those elegant little arrows on it. Only 6% can be recycled. And that's not because people aren't dutifully sorting. It's because it can't be recycled because of the pigments, because of the chemicals, because of the chemical nature of the plastic involved. So where does that go? It goes to landfills and it's burned. The problem with waste in landfills is the amount of methane that's created. The other thing about plastics in the environment, you can't pick up a periodical without reading an article about the environmental impacts of plastics and now the health impacts of plastic. An article in the New England Journal of Medicine the other day about how microplastics are now causing heart attacks and stroke just the same way that cholesterol and plaque are. So it's an incredibly important issue. And finally, the other reason we need to address this is cost. Our municipalities and taxpayers are picking up the cost for single-use packaging that many producers, packaging producers and marketers are supplying simply because it's expedient for them, whether from a marketing standpoint or a shipping standpoint, to use the products that they're using. And the cost of disposing is passed along to you, the taxpayers. Our municipalities are spending an inordinate amount of their revenue and their their time and energy just on managing and sorting waste and getting it from point A to point B. And there's a more efficient way. We need to hold the people who produce this waste responsible for the end use and how we get rid of waste, how we recycle waste, and they need to share in the cost of that. And when they have skin in the game, that will incentivize them to reduce the amount of packaging and to produce more sustainable packaging. You know, obviously, we know we need packaging in the world, but let's use more sustainable materials and methods. That's the way to do it. As Adrian mentioned, this is happening all over the world. It's been going on in Europe for more than a decade. Several states in the United States have enacted extended producer responsibility laws, as have all the provinces in Canada. They're all a little bit different. We're working very hard to craft a bill in New York that will work for New York and for New Yorkers. We have made several iterations of the bill. We are listening very closely to all the stakeholders. We don't want a top-down approach. We want a bill that has buy-in and that can work and be actionable. And we continue to listen to stakeholders. So, you know, Adrian said we have 5 more weeks of session. You know, that can be an eternity in legislative time. So we're optimistic, but we appreciate your interest. We appreciate your feedback, and we appreciate your support. And most of all, I want to thank Citizens Campaign and Adrian and Dawn and Scott once again for all being here to discuss this important topic.
Thank you, Senator, and sincerely, thank you so much for your leadership and willingness to tackle this issue, which can be quite complicated. And also, it has not been it's not been a picnic. Let's be honest. There's been a lot of challenges. So we appreciate you and your commitment to getting this done. So let's begin. So Dawn Tim is our first speaker. Dawn is the chair of the New York State Product Stewardship Council. She's going to be speaking to us about recycling, packaging, and policy. But also, I just want to remind folks, there will be time at the end for questions and answers. So please put your questions in the Q&A. You might want to wait a little bit till Dawn and Scott speak, because they might be answering some of the questions that you feel you have. And I can't really stress to you enough the amount of information and such valuable resource that both Dawn and Scott have provided to us in this endeavor. They really know this issue, they know this process, and they will be able to provide substantive, meaningful answers. So with no further ado, Dawn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and for Citizens Campaign for putting this together. I would certainly be remiss if I didn't recognize Senator Pete Harcum in just the introduction. The unwavering support and commitment to waste reduction and the policy is paramount, and in leadership like that, it's enticing and encouraging. So we hope to continue the momentum. And again, thank you, Senator Harcum. So again, I am Dawn Tim. I have 2 functions and roles. Many of you may have heard me speak before on behalf of the New York Product Stewardship Council. We are a council predominantly made up of local government representatives that advocates for extended producer responsibility policy. And also, I am the director of Niagara County's Division of Environmental and Solid Waste. So just a brief explanation of EPR. You've heard Adrian discuss EPR as challenging to understand. So this is why I love this graphic. If we start with the virgin materials component and really look at the entire graphic, it represents one thing, and that is a circle. It's the circular component or circularity of the economy is what we're striving for. And through EPR, we are engaging the manufacturer in the product's end of life, right? That, as Senator Harcum said, there's some skin in the game. So we start with our virgin materials. They're produced, they're sold, we buy them. If we reuse and refill them, they come back into the system and we discard them. Either they go to landfill, which means they're residual waste and they're out of our circle, or we can reuse them infinitely, perhaps. That's the best case scenario, or to some extent. If they're sorted and exported, they leave the circle. But if they're reprocessed and remanufactured and resold, This is the type of circular economy that we're looking for. This becomes extremely challenging for a local government alone to implement this process. I've said many times before that, you know, it's a one-way street really as a local government looking to provide sanitation and recycling services to residents. Resident needs service, they contact local government, we provide it. There's no opportunity for engagement with the manufacturer or even a retailer or anyone that's involved in the production or distribution of the product. By engaging them, we have their input into potentially making the material more recyclable, less toxic, easily accessible, items like that. This is a busy slide, but if anything, I just want to reiterate the fact that extended producer responsibility policy in New York is nothing new to anyone who lives here. You know, starting back in 1982, we had the New York State bottle bill. That is a true form of EPR where you have the bottlers paying into a program. And of course, as we go purchase a soda or a beer, we pay our 5 cents and we get that back upon redemption. It's an incredibly successful program. Also other retailer involved programs, including waste oil, lead acid batteries. We have rechargeable batteries, which is becoming even more prevalent as we start to make the transition to electrification. We have electronic waste and the rapid obsolescence of our electronics and the proliferation of that waste material. Pharmaceuticals, one that is, you know, kind of borders on the public health, public safety, and environmental aspects. That too, we have in place requiring retail locations as pharmacies to take back. We recently have paint that's been acted that involves a consumer fee, and we will soon have carpet, which was passed in the 2022 budget cycle, and going. And I know I ripped through those rather quickly, and I certainly implore anyone to reach out to me directly if you'd like more information on those. Again, as you heard Senator Harcum indicate that, you know, we've got a bit of a crisis on our hands here. And this chart may not mean a whole heck of a lot to you until I explain it. But this is a snapshot of a 5-year time frame of a community in Niagara County, New York. And this is a city of approximately 40,000 people. And they've been recently faced with the decision of having to pay approximately $212 per ton to recycle when their disposal costs are approximately $45 per ton. Now that is upside down. And in this chart, just even looking at the minus $50 on the x-axis, or excuse me, the y-axis there is absolutely no point where recycling had any value that exceeded the rate, or excuse me, exceeded in the sense that it was less than the rate of disposal. This is the problem. Local governments are suffering financially. And the challenge is these local elected officials, whether it's a common council, a mayor, a city manager, or a county executive, are faced with the decision, do I embark on a process to cease recycling and have that blow up? How do we erase 30 years of effort into sorting and separating and placing it out? And the good, I mean, it feels good to recycle. We're doing our part. How do you erase that? And how are you, that elected official that doesn't think you're going to get chased out of office for being the individual that's saving that type of money? It's challenging and it's hard. And it comes in the wake of, again, a proliferation in the amount of waste that we see. Packaging is only getting more sophisticated. I'm a woman of a certain age, and I can remember my brown bag lunch, you know, consisting of a few plastic bags, but it's certainly nothing like how I pack my children's lunch, which I have in a future slide. But if anything, this that I want to reiterate here is in a relative scale. You're looking at approximately $45 per ton to dispose of waste in this community, and the high end of the expense to process with revenue included is $212, and at no point did we ever eclipse the cost of disposal. So this here in the graphic, and it's on my left, this is what my daughter's lunch looks like. So don't judge me for what I feed her. This is just the stuff she likes. But everything in there is pretty much everything besides me rocking it out with my reusable container there and spoon, is packaging, and it's packaging that cannot be recycled. We have 85% of our waste stream is made up of recyclables. This is a most recent, the phase 1 of the needs assessment done for New York. And 40% of that is packaging related. Of that, 65% is paper. It is essential and important that we remove paper from our waste stream. It creates greenhouse gases. It is an expense through the recycling system, and it is readily recyclable. We need to capture paper. We have plastics at 15% and growing, and glass and metals. And interestingly enough, we found that 40 to 50% of all plastics are single use in nature. So addressing single use is extremely important as well. Some of the downside, we're looking at across the entire state, approximately 17% of waste is recycled. Some communities are better than others. I will absolutely give it that. There are, if you look at it on a decade basis, we've seen such a rapid increase in the type of packaging and a transition from glass to plastic and such. But we're not moving the needle on recycling. It's still kind of hovering around that just less than 20% rate. We can do much better, especially when 85% of the waste stream is made up of recyclables. We need to capture more. But how do we get there? And how did we get here? Yeah, you can look to a lot of things. You can look to the rise of e-commerce colliding with the pandemic, where everything's wrapped in plastic and is safer. And I'm not going to argue that point, but it involves the proliferation of the waste source. You smash that into the bottoming out of commodity markets and the loss of China as a major exporter, and then this massive volatility that we're seeing. That in any given month of any year, the rates of fiber are very volatile, which causes our programs to suffer. I've long said this too, is that local governments are not a very nimble organization, right? We can't adjust on the fly to rapidly changing commodity rates. So now getting back to what we can do. Who bears the cost of all this? Well, right now it's us. It's local government. It's if your local government provides you with a recycling service, you're paying for it. Whether you recycle 17% or 85% or 0%, you're paying for it. But we can improve. It's a struggle. Across New York State, we have tens of different programs. Could be up, every county and every town has something different from the next county and the next town. There's no continuity. And it's a challenge to ramp up the resources to make Buffalo different from Niagara Falls, different from Syracuse, and different from Manhattan. And to that point, we have almost $250 to $300 million annually is spent on recycling. So you have $150 million has been slated out of New York City alone, and the remainder of 100 to 150 million across the rest of the state. Any sort of resource or revenue or rescue that we can provide through policy, specifically EPR policy, is going to provide struggling local governments with relief. And this relief can come in the form of increased education, increasing convenience, obviously providing us with financial resources to fund our program and expand our programs, not expanding them for more people, but but also expanding the materials that we can accept. By engaging the manufacturers in EPR policy, we're promoting sustainable design, right? They can design something that's more recyclable. We can reduce waste, not necessarily transitioning from a glass to a plastic, but potentially they can reduce the waste by lightweighting in some circumstances or changing product design. They can make it more recyclable and boost demand. So the policy that's before this session has rates and dates demanding specific recycled content. That gets back to my circular graphic, right? If we're creating demand for the product as a raw material and decreasing virgin use, then we're increasing that market. We're stimulating that market. Oh, my apologies there. This policy also will create a financial incentive to generate less waste, use non-toxic and reusable materials. This bill has evolved over the 4 or 5 budget cycles that we've been involved with it, and to the point where we're now talking about refill and reuse. And this is incredibly important. Again, getting back to my graphic regarding circularity. This is a real opportunity to modernize New York's very stagnant recycling rate, as I indicated. We can take that 17% and we can move it up to 60, 70% perhaps, which is exactly what we're seeing in some of the Canadian provinces. It is attainable. tripling recycling rates provides a tremendous amount of benefit across the state. We have relief for local governments. We have job creation through green jobs. We're decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. It's a triple win. So what's been the challenge? Engaging local governments. Sometimes in the capacity that I speak in any crowd, I feel like I'm taking the issue to my local government counterparts and saying, you're feeling this, right? You know that if you're budgeting for recycling services, that line item for recycling processing has increased so substantially. We can do something about it. And we need to hear from you. We need local governments to share with their state delegation and to contact the state and say, we need relief. We need help with our local recycling programs. We need to unify the environmental community. Many of us within the environmental community have come together and have collaborated. And with anything, it always requires compromise. And this is certainly a factor in this situation. We need to work with elected officials and leaders, which having Senator Harckham here today is fantastic, and others within our community. And lastly, on this point, we need to battle through poor and unsubstantiated data. We hear about the plastics crisis and such, and things that might not necessarily be close to home. Irregardless of where you live in the state, I've got Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, out my back door. But it's not the Pacific, patch of circulating plastics, but it all contributes to something. And then another thing we hear quite a bit of is, well, my grocery cost is going to increase. And there is now just a second release study indicating that is absolutely not the case in the state of Washington, who is promoting similar policy to us related to packaging. And I implore you on your Instacart app to find your local grocer and then find another one across town with the same 5 goods and tell me what the price difference is. Pricing is about convenience. Pricing is not about packaging and whose policy is where. That is about all I'll say, and I'll wrap up here. And I know Adrian had indicated that there'll be questions for later. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dawn. Much appreciated. I forgot to mention earlier, I do want to thank very much our co-sponsoring organizations, which is NYSAC and NYCOM, the New York Coalition of Mayors, and also the New York State Association of Counties. So thank you for your participation and your sponsorship, and also for our Assembly champion, Assemblywoman Deborah Glick, who's also championing EPR and reduce solid waste and is very dedicated to it as well. She couldn't participate with us today, but she absolutely is here in spirit. Okay, our next speaker and our last speaker is the infamous Scott Passel. Scott is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute. His presentation will be to address a New York State solid waste crisis for municipalities as well. So Scott, thank you very much.
Okay. You see the presentation?
Yes, looks great.
All right. Yep, say that again.
Could you please put it in presenters mode so it's full screen?
I thought I just did. There we go. Now
Yes, that's perfect. Now it's better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Adrian. And Dawn, thank you for that presentation to set the stage here. I also want to thank Brian and the CCE staff for putting on this really critical educational webinar. It's important to understand the details, but it is not super complicated. We've done this many times before. So this is in depth, yes, but it's not undoable. I also want to thank Senator Harckham, Chairman Harckham, for championing this packaging bill in New York. We were joking before getting on this call, it's like wrestling an alligator. But we have a whole, more than a village here. We've got a lot of different supporters, and we're going to be able to do this along with NYCOM, NYSAC, Chairman Glick, and all the other supporters on this. And that's why you're here, is to gain your support for a really good bill in New York. I'm going to zoom out from where Dawn was, and I'm going to give a national and international perspective on things. So Who are we? Who's the Product Stewardship Institute? Well, we're a nonprofit. We've been working solely on extended producer responsibility policies for the past 23 years. We have members from state and local governments all over the country. That includes those here in New York. And we have partners that are mostly companies, but also environmental groups, academic institutions, and international governments. So what we've done over the past 2 decades is to take the best policies of EPR, mostly in Europe and Canada, where they've been most developed, bring them to the United States, work with state and local government officials and other stakeholders to find the policy that is right for your state. So state and local governments really started the national EPR movement in the US in 2000. I want those of you that are local government, which is the vast majority, your colleagues, predecessors have started the national movement in the US. The engine for EPR was state and local governments. Now, there's 2 reasons for that, and Dawn's covered these. It's removing the financial and management burden from governments in managing this waste stream. It's just become untenable, and I'll talk about it in a little bit. I was a state policy official in Massachusetts, and I felt this very starkly. So yes, there's many other benefits as well. Reduction in greenhouse gas impacts. EPA, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, has done a study that 29% of the life cycle of consumer products, upstream and downstream, is related to greenhouse gas emissions, 29%. I know it's 11% in New York, but it's greater overall. And hey, we're all breathing the same air. It's significant public health and environmental protection benefits as well through reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting with EPR. Now, why did governments take the lead? Well, first of all, local governments, as Dawn mentioned, are most impacted. You feel it in the pocketbook. I mean, that is really what's generated this. And with the markets being cut off in China a number of years ago, over a series of years, the costs for local governments have increased dramatically. And that's gotten the attention of many here in the United States. Well, state governments got involved because they can change the situation. States are the ones that develop the EPR policy. And states have to balance many interests. Those are the corporate, environmental justice, waste management. Those are the collectors, recyclers, local government, and yes, the state has its own state interests. And this is a really tough job. Now, I've been working on waste issues for 40 years in the United States. And prior to founding PSI in 2000, I was 7 years as the waste policy director in Massachusetts, liaison with the governor's office and 7 of the departments. And it's a tough job to develop the policy with all the different interests, very, very strong financial, environmental, health interests that are at play. But it can be done, and it really must be done. And, you know, there's no alternative, because as local governments, you don't want the situation to get worse. It will just keep getting worse and worse and worse until it is fixed. And so the time for that to be fixed is now. Now, how do we enact a packaging EPR law in New York? Well, as I use this word, a balance of interests. I'm a trained mediator, so that's sort of where PSI comes in, is how to balance these interests. So each of the 4 states with packaging EPR laws here, Colorado, Maine, Oregon, and California, each of them has found their own balance. They've passed packaging EPR laws. They're not perfect, but they found a balance to get it through. Illinois and Maryland had bills, but they dropped back into what we call a pre-EPR needs assessment. It's figuring out what's needed in the states and what's the cost going to be. How do you have better recycling, reuse, composting, and reducing that waste? So New York needs to find its own balance, and it's close, but perhaps not there yet. So I'm going to take another look at why EPR is needed. So stepping back, if you look at the far left, municipal management of trash 100 years ago and more was a real revelation. I mean, it was an innovation. It was done for protection, environmental protection, but also public health benefits. Having the municipality, cities coordinate getting trash off the streets. Well, after a while, those of us in the 1970s that saw the Earth Day and the environmental movement started to volunteer in recycling. We knew that stuff couldn't be thrown out forever. But after a while, as a volunteer, many of us said, hey, we can't do it anymore. It's just well beyond voluntary capacity. So we lobbied cities and towns, and I was in Philadelphia at the time. I lobbied the mayor's office and with other environmental groups I was working with at the time. And we got the city of Philadelphia to hire the first recycling coordinator in the state. Well, that was, again, a big revelation and a big shift from volunteer into government managed. But now, having been the director of waste policy in the 1990s in Massachusetts, I saw the leveling off of recycling, and I saw the system just hit its plateau. So that's why I, along with many other state and local governments, and now many, many thousands of other people, are promoting EPR. So we've moved now to the next paradigm shift of EPR, where the producers are funding and managing the recycling systems and reuse and composting in a multi-stakeholder accountability. So Dawn had a circular chart. We use that as well, of course, but here's another way to look at this definition. This definition of EPR is not just a general definition. It was one developed by US state and local governments all across the country 2 decades ago. All right, this has established a vision, what I say is probably half a century. We're talking 50 years for this new concept to take hold and go all the way upstream to past like product design and thinking, how is cotton grown in the field? What are the worker conditions? What pesticide, what's being used? Is it organic or pesticides, toxic, all the way downstream post-consumer through reuse, recycling, and safe disposal. And that could mean the new term is the end markets that are sustainable. You want responsible end markets. So where is that material going? Where are those textiles going? Well, we know they're going to Ghana and other African countries, that they're going to landfills. Well, that's not really responsible. So how do we bring all of that together? This is going to take some time for us to work out, but it's starting, and that's the vision. So here's where we started in 2000. Very sparse EPR landscape, 8 laws on 1 product that was rechargeable batteries in 7 states. Here we are today, 2024, 136 EPR laws have passed on 18 products, including packaging, in 33 states. You can see the activity of the Northeast, the Great Lakes area, and the West Coast. And here's another trajectory. You can see how it has increased from 2000 all the way to where we are today. Massive increase of this new policy. And as Dawn mentioned, there's 6 laws here in New York, but we work on over 25 different waste streams and have developed models for all these on a policy basis. And they're out here, they're developing. It's a policy, EPR is a policy done on a product basis. So that's really important. We're not just looking at like taking all the waste and putting it in a landfill or putting it in a waste to energy facility. Even recycling, there's so many products and wish cycling products that go into a material recycling facility. Sometimes you have to break it down, batteries and thermostats and carpet and electronics and paint and pharmaceuticals. They all are around the same basic concepts of EPR, same basic elements, but done a little bit differently. So here's where we are. We've been working on packaging for 15 years at PSI, and you see that there's 4 packaging EPR laws: Oregon, California, Colorado, and Maine in 2021 and 2022. There's 2 needs assessment laws, Illinois and Maryland, but there's also 13 states, including New York, that have bills over the past 2 years. This is an explosion of activity that we've seen. So here are how policies are developed. These are the same 16 elements for every effective EPR law. I'm not going to go through all of them here. They're standard. I just want you to know that there's a method for developing all of the bills that have been passed in the United States. Some of them go into what are really effective bills, and other ones maybe less so, but they're all based on these 16 different elements one way or another. So covered materials is on packaging is, what do we mean by packaging? Primary, secondary, tertiary, there's definitions for that. Does it have paper in it? Does it have plastic, single-use products and other single-use products in it? Covered entities, where are these materials being collected from? And is it all multifamily or just up to a certain amount? Is it all residential? Is it some commercial? Usually it's where the recycling trucks and garbage trucks are going. If that's the system that would be covered under EPR. If it's a residential, small commercial is usually where it is. Sometimes institutional public spaces are added. Collection and convenience. How do we make it equitable for all those in rural areas and in multifamily and so forth? So it goes into all of these details, how it's governed, where the funding inputs are, the funding outputs into the system to strengthen it and to put in place infrastructure that does not exist right now. So this is a proven method, and it's the same method that EPR laws in New York have followed. All right, so I want to introduce a concept here that we should all consider. So for New York packaging EPR bill that's right now, there's many aspects within the elements that I showed you that are all the same. They're very much the same as any other bill. And like governance, there's a producer responsibility organization, an advisory council that is multi-stakeholder, that gives input into the PRO, producer responsibility organization, and then the DEC as oversight and ultimate decision-making authority on it. But there's some particular aspects of the current bill that are still being discussed. And I'm not going to get into all of the specifics on the webinar, but bottom line is New York does need to find common ground on a bill to reach a balance of interests. And my advice, by seeing this over the past 15 years, particularly over the past 5, is to get the train running, pass a good EPR bill in packaging, and strengthen the law over time and make sure it can be strengthened over time. So each year that a bill goes by that's not passed is millions of dollars for local governments to continue spending on these programs. So how do we do this? Well, it can be phased over time. It needs to be done in the right way. It can be done through existing law. As says here, you can include it in existing law and say, all right, in 3 years, this will be phased in. In 5 years, this will be phased in, or there'll be a study, or there'll be something. But consider it over the long term. Or you could require the state, DEC, to develop a regulation by a specific date, or require the producer responsibility organization to propose a plan for adding a certain aspect of the bill by a specific date, and it's going to be reviewed by the advisory council and then ultimately by the state itself. So there are options, and all of these are super critical, but no one bill can get done everything that we want. It does need to be phased in over time. All the 4 states that I mentioned that have laws, they're going to keep changing over time. And in Europe and Canada, the laws have changed over time. It allows learning to take place during the implementation, and it doesn't need to be done for all at one time. So let me move us to what's happening in Europe and Canada. So in Europe, packaging EPR bills have been in place for over 35 years. EPR started in Germany, packaging EPR law on packaging in Germany in 1992, and it is they have a lot of experience. Canada, over 15 years. And so the progress did take time, as I mentioned before. And have they figured it out? No, they haven't figured it all out now, but they're moving forward and they're way ahead of the United States. Now, I want to end with two last things. One is this producer statement. Dawn mentioned there's no evidence that the cost of consumer goods will go up. This is what we're seeing too with studies and other information. Here is testimony that was written testimony in Connecticut state legislature last year. And it is by a colleague, Joachim Coden, who was director of Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance. They are producers. This is an alliance of thousands of producers that are operating systems for decades in Europe. And he says, globally, industries in more than 40 countries rely on EPR as a key economic tool to ensure the collection and recycling of used packaging. Throughout the EU, packaging recovery is now over 60% for all countries, with significantly higher rates in Germany and Belgium, which are over 80%. With 10 years of experience in numerous country packaging EPR programs, I can assure you, Joachim says, that the product prices have not been increased significantly and that EPR has not led to a higher inflation rate. This is by the producers, and producers in Germany, in Europe, are very proud of their programs. And lastly, just want to end by this. We're all in this together. It's a network of accountability. It's not just the producers, but it's the collectors, the recyclers, retailers, many of you that are municipalities, state agencies, and consumers. So it's a network of responsibility. The only policy that I've ever seen that for the waste side that has been able to create this network is EPR. So I'd say get the program underway and keep adding to it over time. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Adrian.
Thank you so much, Scott. But before you go, I just want to, not that you're going anywhere, we're having a question and answer session, but Karen here has a question of clarity for you about something you said. She's asking, are you saying that municipalities should look into not sending plastics to be recycled, to keep residents separating, though, as to keep behavior in place for when recycling plastic improves?
Well, I'm not sure I said it. I'm not sure what that relates to what I said. But I'd say recycle plastics. These EPR laws are putting in place systems that will have what they call a material recyclable list, sort of the readily recyclable, what those who are the experts in this, who are running the material recycling facilities, what they and other stakeholders think are the basket of recyclables that every community in the state should collect. And in New York, it'll be a reimbursement system. So for the municipalities to be, and other could be private as well, for them to be reimbursed, they would have to collect all of this basket of recyclables, and they'll decide based upon the types of plastics, which ones would be in that box and which ones will be out of that box for now. And it doesn't mean they won't be brought in later. So it's just saying that, yes, keep recycling the plastics at this point, but through the system, and we haven't really used the term eco-modulated fees, but this is Dawn kind of hinted at. It's one of those wonky terms. I know Adrian hates the EPR term, as many people do. So you really probably don't like the eco-modulated, but it means that we're giving incentives, financial incentives for those producers, the brands, to put on the market plastics and other materials that have better environmental footprint to them. That's what we're looking to do. They pay more if it's more cost to the system and it becomes trash or can't be recycled or has low cost, and less cost if it's more recyclable.
So just, to chime in here, look, the bottom line is that, as Scott said, there's been, quote, an explosion of activity, to use Scott's phrase, over the last several years about EPR. It's not going away. We here in New York need to join on to the extended producer responsibility bandwagon for packaging materials. And this is the wave of the future. This is the way it's going to be managed better and safer and cleaner and less expensive. So there are some manufacturers and producers out there, not all of them, but some that are putting fear information out there that it's going to increase the cost of goods. You just saw Scott put up that slide from Europe and places that have implemented it, saying it has zero impact, zero economic impact on the cost of goods and the cost of inflation. So, excuse me, we could either listen to the fear factor or we could listen to the facts in the everyday experience where it has been implemented. I think facts should guide us, not the fear. So, Dawn, did you want to chime in about that question about plastic recycling?
I do, yes. And first of all, I'm going to start off by saying I apologize if I had lent any impression that recycling was not valuable in any capacity. Absolutely continue to recycle your plastics. Plastics 1 and 2 are widely accepted across the state in almost all programs. I would have you exercise caution as for plastics 3 through 7, as various programs across the state do not collect them. But, source reduction is also, one thing that we didn't mention as we're looking to curb packaging. Also reducing at the source is another option too, if you're looking to take matters into your own hands before, before you even generate the waste. But yes, continue to recycle plastics, absolutely 1 and 2.
Okay. Just want to read, an anonymous attendee wrote in, Dawn referenced that the in-progress needs assessment being conducted by New York State. Yes, in case people don't know, there is a needs assessment currently underway, almost to conclusion, I hear, for New York State. I think it's important to also include that effort in any conversation about what's happening across the country with regard to packaging and EPR, especially when the 2 states that passed laws for needs assessments are mentioned. The New York Needs Assessment will build a foundation on which a future EPR program for packaging and paper products should be built. Okay, thank you, anonymous attendee. Appreciate your input. Yes, John, the recording will be sent out, as will the PowerPoint presentations, to all those who signed up for this forum and participated in this forum. So yes, we will do that. Okay, that was is there a venue or a method for a conversation that is well beyond the scope of this presentation? I'm not exactly sure what you mean, anonymous. Maybe if you could please type in, a question of clarity. Okay, here's one. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There are many conversations taking place. It depends
Yes.
upon who this anonymous attendee is. If they're from the U.S. Plastics Pact has conversations around plastics. Our organization has conversations for our state and local government members. We also bring in our corporate partners and other partners as well into those. It depends upon what conversation you're looking for. So if you want to send that to CCE, be a little more specific, we can hopefully be able to help you through that. New York Product Stewardship Council also is another venue in New York where the conversations are taking place. So I think there's lots of conversations and it depends upon sort of your approach and your affiliation.
Tyson has asked a question that we get a lot. Dawn, I think this one is for you. How do municipalities access the refunds?
Great question.
Yes.
There are 2 philosophies that have been entertained. One of them is, for lack of any better term, but to keep it simple, is more of an industry-dominated producer responsibility organization, where the industry identifies their own PRO and that PRO is responsible for determining the rates and the reimbursement that goes to local governments. And that in the manner in which it's in practice across the world is a process where the local government applies for reimbursement with that PRO. In the current version that we're seeing now, I don't have a clear answer on that. And that is one more that is in the camp of the DEC establishing some rates and working on with a PRO that they contract. And I'm assuming that it would be, you know, the very same process with an application. It's just a matter of DEC involvement either through regulation and approval of plans and how those guardrails are set up, or into the actual establishment of the rates in concert with the PRO that is in turn turning those fees over to the manufacturers. I know that's not the most clear way to say it, but we're thinking that the cleaner way is the way that has been done, which is the industry and the PRO with the guardrails set up through policy.
Just as a follow-up to Tyson's question before we get to Maria, Tyson said the bill should recognize that municipalities also have administrative and capital costs associated with management, not just operational. Do you have any comments about that, Dawn or Scott?
Scott, you can go first and I can go second.
Yeah, well, I think municipal handling costs are, I'd say, in a place where for EPR where they need to be discussed and brought forward with data. So if your municipality, if you've kept the data for staff time and whatever costs you have for managing these materials, that should be on the table. It's going to be a little bit foreign, and even the paint program does not have that included, which is one of the more successful ones in the state and across the country. They have not agreed to that yet, but it is very valid, and our local members strongly want all of those costs to be covered. I think one way to make that case is to collect the data, be clear on it, and bring that into the negotiations.
And I'm just going to follow up with what Scott indicated, is that, you know, as an advocate for local government, we have fought for both the inclusion of processing and collection expenses. And that would include whether it's public or private, contract, internal, and that all of those costs, including capital investment to increase recycling, accessibility, et cetera, even education outreach, are included. That is our goal, and we continue to advocate for that.
Okay, and maybe you kind of touched on this, but as a follow-up, let's just get Maria's question in, and then there's one or two I just want to quickly go. So Maria's saying we've all seen consumers everywhere, even when there is extended producer responsibility, such as in Europe, throw recyclables out in the regular garbage. What type of consumer education is included in the current New York State proposed bill? Dawn, would you want to take that from municipalities' perspective?
Sure. And, you know, this is a real broad level response that I'll give. And it's more of my professional opinion on this. Placing a ban or restriction on what can be disposed of is never really popular, right? It you know, tends to inflict sort of almost a deeply emotional response to, well, if you're going to tell me I can't do this, then I'm going to do this. So the incentive is really where we land in this. Like we are incentivizing recycling, right? That's why the bottle bill is so effective. It has an incentive attached to it. Sometimes if you have a refuse cart within your community, right, that the incentive is you don't want to overflow it because then you have to pay for it yourself, or in addition, or you get an extra tag or a sticker or something, right? So you would pull the bulky recyclable material out of your trash cart and put it into your recycle. So it's that type of incentivization that we're looking for. There's certainly no inclusion, at least to the best of my knowledge, of garbage police that are going to go around and look, and if you had a recyclable in there, you know, you're fined. But there are communities that have been effective with that because, I mean, quite frankly, they're paying a lot of money to provide these programs, and it's just a matter of how they're enforced. But to the best of my knowledge, in anything that we've advocated for that's in the bill does not include anything that is punitive regarding the disposal of as a resident. Now, if a recycler were to take that material, that is currently covered within our, I want to say it's 120 AA, or within current regulations and statute by the state, that they could enforce that if somebody collecting recyclables in fact dumps them or disposes them illegally.
Just a short addition. education for consumers is extremely important for reducing the contamination that is right now in the waste stream that is causing extra costs and inefficiency in the system. So what the education will be in a plan that the producers, through the PRO, Producer Responsibility Organization, is submitted to the advisory council for review, and then ultimately to the state for approval. It needs to be very detailed on all the education that it's going to provide. It'll be statewide as opposed to right now and everywhere in the country where it's fragmented. So there's going to be a great deal of attention put on education because it's key to reducing costs that are right now causing wasted recyclables.
So just to get in here also, there's questions about what actions can municipalities take before the state passes something? When are we going to show some economics? So let me just take some of these. Number one is we are currently showing economics. There's, for instance, we know that New York City has put out a statement assessing that they will save approximately $150 million per year if EPR is implemented, and that's just one city. Other municipalities are doing this, step by step for their own. Some are saying 40 million, but it's millions and millions of dollars that would be saved from you and I, the taxpayer, which is local government, if EPR is implemented. So where is the legislation currently? The legislation is moving in the Senate and the Assembly. But the question here by Gregory says, what's the holdup in both houses to marry a bill? It's not just both houses. We also have an executive branch. We have been working diligently to bring both houses and the executive branch together on the same page. I know it sounds easy, but there are a number of areas where there's disagreement. I don't want to go into our negotiations on a Zoom, but they are ongoing, even as, most recently is today, for instance. So we are working to bring a consensus forth that can be agreed upon this legislative session. Also, I want everyone to know we will be sending out, when you get your, your email from us after this, you'll not only have the recording of this Zoom, but there will be links there where if you're with the municipality, you can write a letter of support about the bill. I ask you to please copy me on that email because we're tracking all the municipalities that are supporting it, and there are many, many throughout the state of New York. So that is one thing municipalities can do, is get in a letter of support for waste reduction. That would be extremely helpful. Let me just really quickly look. Any discussion for EPR on other products? Okay, let's not do that right now. The answer is absolutely. As you know, we have it for carpet, which was a big battle a couple years ago. We have it for batteries. We have it for thermometers. So we've been doing it piecemeal. Paint, the bottle bill. But now this would be more of an overarching one. Okay. I'm sorry, we're just not gonna get to all these questions because it's 101, but I want to thank everybody. We will send you out all the follow-up information. And let me see, Dawn or Scott, any last comment?
No, thank you so much to NYCOM, NYSAC, and CCE, the Senator, of course, and Scott, always a pleasure to present with you.
Likewise. Thank you very much for having us.
All right. Thank you so much to all our participants, and wish us luck in the next 5 to 6 weeks. We could use your help.